The coffee cup sat untouched in the holder, rocking slightly with every lane change. I'd poured it in a hurry, telling myself I'd drink it after I parked, after the meeting, after the last signature. The highway was unusually clear. Gray sky, steady speed. My phone buzzed once, then again. I ignored it at first. Clients never called while I was driving. They trusted me to show up. On the third vibration, I answered. "Angela," HR said. Careful and flat. The way people sound when they're reading from a screen. "Your role is terminated. Effective immediately. No explanation, no warning. Just a line drawn clean across 3 years of work." I kept my eyes forward. A truck roared past, close enough to rattle the window. "Understood," I said, and ended the call before she could add anything else. "I think you guys need to know this. The story you're about to hear includes fictionalized elements and uses AI-assisted narration to heighten emotion and clarify the lesson behind it. If this isn't the kind of story you enjoy, feel free to step away and take care of yourself. But if you stay, I hope it gives you something worth thinking about." Actually, the silence that followed was precise, intentional. I knew that voice hadn't belonged to HR alone. Preston Vale didn't fire people himself. He delegated the mess. 6 weeks into the CEO role, he'd already mastered that part. He liked speed, clean exits, decisions that looked bold on slides and heartless in practice. To him, people were operational variables, easy to remove, easy to replace. I had been inconvenient to that worldview. I was the one the client trusted, the constant through leadership changes, legal rewrites, near collapses. When things broke, they called me. Preston called that dependency. I called it accountability. My phone stayed silent as I drove the final stretch. No follow-up, no explanation. Just the road and a strange, tightening calm. When I pulled into the parking garage, I checked my email. An automated message sat at the top of my inbox. Status change confirmed. Authorized by P. Vale. HR had only delivered the words. Preston had pulled the trigger. I shut off the engine and sat there, listening to it tick as it cooled, already understanding that something far larger than my job had just been set in motion. Before we continue, please tell me where you're listening. And if stories like these resonate with you, please stay and subscribe. Every subscription is not only a support for the channel, but also a way to help these lessons reach more people. As stories spread, understanding multiplies, and that's what makes you a valuable part of this community. I stayed in the car longer than I should have. Watching people hurry past my windshield with purpose, I was no longer allowed to have. The meeting room was only an elevator ride away, but my mind kept drifting backward, replaying the years that had led to this silence. I had protected that contract when procurement tried to rush it. I slowed things down when legal wanted shortcuts. I absorbed the anger when timelines slipped and took responsibility when vendors failed. When the client hesitated, I was the one they called at night. Not because I had authority, but because I had earned trust. I remembered promising them continuity. I meant it. Preston Vale arrived after most of that work was finished. He showed up at review meetings with clean slides and decisive language, summarizing months of risk management as operational efficiency. He never asked how we'd kept the client steady through leadership turnover. He didn't want the story, just the result. When he spoke about the deal, he said we had streamlined it. When something went wrong, it was suddenly legacy issues. I had warned him once, carefully, in writing. The email was measured and professional, outlining why this agreement depended on named accountability and uninterrupted responsibility. I flagged the clause. I asked for confirmation. The reply came 2 days later from his assistant, thanking me for my input and assuring me the transition was handled. Now the car was idling in the garage. Concrete walls. No signal bars returning. No follow-up call. No clarification. Just an absence that felt deliberate. I set my phone face down, hands resting on the wheel. They hadn't argued with me. They had simply decided I was disposable, and the system had already accepted it. I breathed, letting the anger compress inward. I didn't rush out of the car. That surprised me most. The anger from minutes earlier had settled into something flatter, colder, almost technical. I had spent years learning how systems behaved under pressure, and this moment felt like one of those pauses before a mechanism finished its work. What Preston Vale never asked was why the client insisted on a named final authority. They didn't want a department. They wanted a person. The contract required a single final authorized signatory, listed by name, approved by their board, verified by compliance. That name was mine. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because accountability had to live somewhere specific. That authority wasn't ceremonial. It couldn't be handed off with a meeting invite or reassigned in a spreadsheet. Any change triggered a review cycle, cooling off period, and written confirmation from both legal teams. I had explained that more than once, calmly, in memos. In meetings, Preston left early, so I did nothing. I didn't call HR back. I didn't warn the client. I didn't walk upstairs to make a scene. I stayed exactly where I was, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, letting the process behave the way it was designed to behave. Minutes passed. The garage echoed with distant doors and footsteps. My phone remained face down. Silence. I'd learned, was often more informative than conversation. Then it vibrated once. An automated message appeared, copied to legal, compliance, and external counsel. Subject line, status change detected. Signatory review initiated. The system had done what systems do. It noticed the mismatch between contract requirements and personnel records. It flagged the inconsistency. It froze progression pending clarification. I exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in recognition. Nothing dramatic had happened yet. No accusations, no panic. Just a clean, procedural response moving forward exactly as written. I turned off the engine, above me. The meeting room lights were still on, waiting for a signature that no longer existed. I stayed seated, calm and alert, understanding that absence, documented and timed, could outweigh any speech delivered upstairs today without raising my voice ever. I watched the meeting unfold through updates that arrived without emotion, the way systems report weather. By the time Preston Vale entered the room, my role had already been erased from the agenda, but my name still lingered where it mattered most. Preston took the chair like it had been waiting for him. He opened with a smile and a phrase he favored whenever people were about to lose something. "This is a simple restructuring," he said. "We're streamlining responsibility." Heads nodded. No one asked whose responsibility had just vanished. He spoke confidently enough to borrow work he'd never done. "We've reduced friction," he added, tapping the table. "We've removed single points of failure." I almost laughed at that line. It sounded efficient. It sounded wrong. When the contract came up, Preston didn't hesitate. "I'll sign," he said. Reaching forward, there was a pause, brief but noticeable, the kind people pretend not to see. A lawyer shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The tablet chimed softly. A red banner appeared. Signature authority denied. Preston frowned and tried again. "Must be a sync issue," he said. Still smiling. The room waited. The system didn't. If you've ever watched confidence collide with process, you know the moment. The air tightens. Words slow down. Someone realizes control was assumed, not granted. I wonder what you would have thought sitting there, watching certainty stall without explanation. "This shouldn't be happening," Preston said. Louder now. "I'm the CEO." The response was automatic and polite. Signatory not recognized. Review required. No accusations. No drama. Just refusal. Preston leaned back, irritation creeping into his voice as he promised to handle it offline. The meeting moved on, but momentum was gone, decisions blurred, time stretched. I sat in the car, unmoving, aware that nothing I'd done in that moment mattered. Authority, once removed, didn't argue. It simply stopped responding. Upstairs, Preston's confidence still filled the room, but the system had quietly drawn a boundary. One no title could cross. And that realization, delayed but inevitable, was already beginning to work on him from this point forward without appeal. I learned about the clause the way most inconvenient truths arrive, quietly and in someone else's voice. I wasn't in the room, but I could picture it clearly as the client's lead counsel leaned forward, fingers steepled, tone polite enough to be dangerous. "Before we proceed," she said, "we need to revisit Section 12. No one had paid much attention to that section in weeks. It sat there, buried under definitions and schedules. Labeled Key Person Requirement. I had insisted it stay exactly as written." The lawyer read it aloud. If the designated final authority was terminated, reassigned, or otherwise rendered inactive before execution, the agreement would be deemed void, without remedy, no grace period, no substitute, no exceptions made for titles acquired too late. The room went still. This wasn't a threat, it was housekeeping. Preston Vale reacted the way people do when rules interrupt momentum. "That's procedural," he said. "We can resolve it after signing." His confidence sounded rehearsed, as if repetition alone could bend language. The lawyer shook her head once. "Termination occurred prior to execution." She replied, "That triggers invalidation." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I imagined the faces around the table as the meaning settled. The deal hadn't failed because of disagreement. It had failed because a sequence had been broken. Process before ego, timing before intent. There was a brief attempt to negotiate. Someone suggested an addendum. Another proposed a pause while internal matters were clarified. The response was firm and unemotional. Compliance required continuity. Continuity no longer existed at that moment. The revelation turned into shock. "We are suspending the transaction," the client said. Not canceled. Suspended. A word that sounded merciful but felt final. I sat in my parked car, phone resting beside me, absorbing the weight of a decision I hadn't made. I hadn't argued. I hadn't warned. I had simply been removed. And the contract had responded accordingly. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. Above me, a billion-dollar deal had just learned that clauses, once ignored, still remember exactly who respected them. In the end, I felt the panic before I heard it, even from the garage. My phone began lighting up with short, clipped messages, the kind people send when composure is already gone and they're trying to sound busy instead of afraid. Upstairs, Preston Vale was unraveling. I learned later that his first move was volume. "How did this happen?" he demanded. "Who approved this HR legal? IT. Everyone received a share of the blame. Panic looks a lot like leadership when it's loud enough." HR answered first. "The termination was authorized by you." "Preston," she said, reading directly from the record. "No apology, no cushion, just fact." He pushed back immediately. "Reverse it," he snapped. "Fix the status." Legal didn't raise their voice. "We can't," they said. "The personnel log is time-stamped. Once executed, it's immutable." That word landed hard. Immutable. I had used it myself in risk reviews. Always calmly, always hypothetically. Preston tried a different angle. "IT can roll it back," he said. The response came just as flat. "System changes are auditable. Any alteration would be visible to the client." Silence followed, the kind that doesn't invite more arguments. From my seat in the car, the chaos felt distant but precise, like watching a structure fail exactly where it was weakest. No one was asking how to restore trust. They were asking how to erase evidence. Then the final message arrived. Subject line, transaction status update. The client's notice was brief, professionally phrased, and devastating, due to non-compliance with the key person provision. The transaction was formally withdrawn, effective immediately. I exhaled slowly. This was no longer confusion. It was consequence. I imagined Preston still standing there, insisting this could be fixed, arguing that intent should matter more than sequence. But systems don't respond to intent. They respond to inputs. And once the wrong input is confirmed, resistance only accelerates the collapse already underway. By then, The room had turned against him, not out of loyalty to me, but because panic always searches for a single signature to blame, and found it waiting where authority had been abused. I learned the number without anyone saying it out loud. It appeared in a forwarded email, copied to me by default, the way consequences sometimes arrive when no one thinks to exclude you anymore. The subject line was neutral, almost kind. Transaction update. Inside, a single paragraph confirmed what everyone upstairs had just lost. $1.2 billion. Gone. Not frozen, not delayed. Withdrawn in full, in accordance with contractual terms. No blame assigned, no emotion offered. I sat back and read it twice. The language was clean, legal, and final. This wasn't a collapse. It was a closure. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do when continuity was broken. No voices raised, no doors slammed, just a quiet subtraction that would echo for years. Being copied on the message felt deliberate. The client hadn't addressed me directly, but they wanted the record intact. Everyone who mattered could see the chain. Everyone could see when authority changed hands and when trust disappeared with it. For a moment, I felt nothing. Not relief, not vindication, just a steady calm settling into place, like a verdict delivered without ceremony. Justice, when it's procedural, doesn't announce itself. It simply removes options. Then my phone rang. Preston Vale's name filled the screen. Not HR, not legal. Him. I let it ring once, twice, long enough to hear the garage hum around me when I answered. His voice came through tight and controlled. "Angela," he said, as if familiarity might undo the timeline. "We need to talk." I looked at the email again. At the timestamp, he could no longer outrun. "There's nothing to clarify," I replied. "The process already has." The line went quiet, for the first time that day. So did he. I ended the call without another word. Understanding that silence, documented and complete, had finished what authority had arrogantly started earlier that morning in his office. I didn't move when Preston called back. The tone was carefully measured, almost polite, as if courtesy could reverse damage. "Angela, we'd like you to come upstairs and help clarify a few things," he said. I looked around the garage, at concrete pillars that didn't care who ran the company. "There's nothing to clarify," I answered. He paused, then shifted. "This isn't about titles. It's about fixing a situation." I thought of his voice weeks earlier, calm and assured, telling me, "People are replaceable." I repeated it back to him, slowly, so he could hear every word. "That's what you said. I meant it." Silence stretched. Then he tried again, offering context, implying future opportunities. I declined, not angrily, not triumphantly, just clearly. If you're listening, ask yourself this: when someone discards people so easily, what happens when they need them back minutes later? Messages started circulating. Board members had questions. Shareholders wanted timelines. Preston's name was appearing in places he didn't control. When I ended the call, the balance had already shifted. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't returned upstairs. But power, once misused, has a way of finding new hands without asking permission first. The calls didn't stop. Legal asked for statements, investors asked for numbers, and Preston asked for time. Time was the one thing he'd already spent. I remained where I was, watching authority travel away from him in real time. The invitation to return never came again. It didn't need to, by then. The story no longer belonged to either of us, but to everyone who was watching what happens when power mistakes access for ownership, and learns too late that control only works until systems decide otherwise. That lesson doesn't shout. It documents. It waits. Patient, accurate, and unimpressed, until the right names appear in the wrong columns, where denial becomes visible to everyone who once assumed they were untouchable forever before today. I didn't attend the emergency board meeting, but its gravity reached me anyway. Updates arrived in fragments, stripped of drama, carrying the weight of decisions made too late. The board convened under pressure, not to save the deal, but to understand how authority had been misused so precisely. Preston Vale tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. He spoke about speed, about decisive leadership, about unfortunate timing. The room didn't echo his confidence anymore. Directors asked for records, not explanations. Legal timelines replaced rhetoric. The termination approval surfaced on screen. His name attached, time-stamped, undeniable. Responsibility narrowed quickly. It always does when facts line up cleanly. HR confirmed process. Compliance confirmed sequence. External counsel confirmed exposure. There was nowhere left to redirect blame without contradicting evidence already shared with shareholders. By the end of the call, the tone had changed. Not angry. Administrative. Emotion was raised. Another seconded. Preston was placed on immediate suspension pending review. No speeches followed. Titles lose their power fast when trust collapses. I read the summary from my phone, parked in the same space where the day had started unraveling. Collapse doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like bullet points and silence between them. Then a new email arrived. This one wasn't copied broadly. It was addressed to me alone. The client thanked me for my professionalism and clarity over the years. They acknowledged the disruption, then made an offer. They wanted continuity. They wanted advisory support directly, outside the structure that had failed them. I stared at the screen, absorbing the shift. Preston had lost control trying to assert it. I had lost nothing by refusing to chase it. I accepted the invitation to talk, not out of victory, but alignment. As I stepped out of the car, I understood the fall wasn't just Preston's. It was the inevitable result of confusing power with ownership, and forgetting that accountability, once removed, doesn't disappear. It relocates. That realization settled quietly, leaving no room for regret. Only clarity about what endures when roles vanish and consequences finally choose their rightful direction. Forward together. I left the parking garage slowly, not because I was unsure, but because nothing needed to be rushed anymore. The engine hummed, steady and ordinary, as I merged back into traffic carrying no badge, no title, and no urgency to prove anything to anyone. What happened wasn't revenge. I didn't trigger alarms or make calls. I didn't warn or threaten. I followed procedure. And the system followed logic. When authority was removed, responsibility stopped responding. Consequences arrived without my involvement. Exactly as designed. I thought about how often power mistakes motion for control, how easily people assume that removing a person erases their function. It doesn't. It exposes the structure underneath. And if that structure is honest, it corrects itself. By the time I reached the street, the company was already rewriting narratives, preparing statements, assigning committees. None of that concerned me. My part had ended when my name was taken off a screen and left on a contract. I drove on, satisfied in a quiet, unspectacular way. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply balances accounts and moves forward. I didn't lose my job that day. They lost their future, and I kept driving, certain the ledger was closed. I didn't walk away from that day feeling victorious. I walked away feeling clear. Clear about how systems work, clear about how trust is built slowly and lost instantly, and clear about one thing we often forget when we're tired. Loyal. And trying to do the right thing, your value isn't erased just because someone decides they're done with you. What stayed with me wasn't the money or the collapse. It was the quiet moment in the car. Realizing I hadn't failed, I had been removed. There's a difference. Failure is personal. Removal is political. And when you understand that, the shame stops sticking. If you've ever sat in silence after a meeting, a call, or a message that changed everything, you know that feeling. The world doesn't stop. Traffic moves, coffee gets cold, and somehow, you're still here. So let me ask you this. Honestly, where are you listening from right now? A car? A kitchen? A late-night room after work? Tell me in the comments. I read them more than you think. If this story resonated, consider liking and sharing it with someone who needs the reminder. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, real consequences, and dignity that doesn't beg for permission, subscribe. We don't tell these stories to win. We tell them so people don't feel alone.